feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled TIFF review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rorabeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchen.
Saddle up, Matt. We got a busy day ahead of us recording what seems like, 5 reviews?
Yeah. It's day 6, day 5 of the festival. What the hell day is it? 5,
I don't
6?
know anymore, man.
I had a 6 movie day yesterday. You have a weird sleeping schedule, so you could say it's a 5 movie day for you, but then you also watched like 4 yesterday, but then you only slept for a couple hours, so I don't know what the hell. You could say you had a 11 movie day.
So I'm probably going to sound a little more loopy than normal, but at the same time, you want to take advantage of, watching as much as you can, whether it be at home or in person. So, if you do have a weird sleep schedule, that's fine. It's just, adjusting once the festival is over. That's the thing that matters the most. But also I think we've been pretty good in terms of, like, this is, inside baseball, but like, diet and things like that compared to previous TIFFs where like usually, when it was in person, the concession stands would be open in the before times, and
a lot of cherry Coke and M&Ms and
Maltesers and Sour Patch Kids.
I've eaten a lot of Egg McMuffins this TIFF though. So, because again, more inside baseball. Today we are reviewing Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog, but I know
which will be premiering on Netflix later this year.
Ironically, I was drinking out of my Show Me mug. RIP. Yeah, it'll we'll talk about that in a sec, but I know if you're clicking on this review, you definitely want to hear about what we've been eating.
Well, especially the Egg McMuffins, which is the unofficial sponsor of the Untitled, Matt and Eric's Untitled Movie Podcast.
Yeah, because
experience.
We've had to take the train in every day because neither of us live downtown right now. And there's a McCafe, a McDonald's cafe right before we get on the train. So we've been so busy that we're running back from this train that like every time we're in Union Station, I'm like, I'm gonna get an Egg McMuffin and some little hash brown bites. So like that's been my like mid-afternoon lunch every day for the last like week, but very healthy. But forget about
They're
that.
So greasy, man. Like
the sausage
I love
ones
Egg
are
McMuffins.
The bacon
well,
one,
even the egg though. The egg is weirdly greasy,
slimy a little bit, but I don't know if it's grease. There's probably butter, but I love Egg McMuffins.
We'll be talking about butter more with Julia coming up later.
But today we are reviewing Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog, which Eric mentioned will be in theaters in limited release on November 17th, and then will be on Netflix on December the 1st. It stars Benedict Cumberbatch, Kirsten Dunst, Jesse Plemons, Cody Smith-McPhee. Thomasin McKenzie pops up. I had no idea she was in this, and she's in about 15-20 minutes of it.
Star of Last Night in Soho.
Yeah. Which we reviewed, which you guys can check out. It was just weird. Yep. We'll get to that, but her being in such a small part in this movie, but had such a large role in that. Also, the second movie scored by Johnny Greenwood this festival as well.
Yes, and I'm gonna talk about this now, even before we get into the movie. I was talking to you about it before we started recording.
Am I lit properly? I have my monitor really low. Like, do I look fine?
I mean, you look okay. Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
thanks.
You don't look
Anyways,
bad
keep
or
going,
anything.
Keep going.
So we have 2 Benedict Cumberbatch movies that we'll be reviewing today, and obviously,
it's raining cats and dogs for him this
It
festival,
literally is, because The Electric Life of Louis Wayne,
which you can check out a review of as well.
Yes, is a biopic about said painter Louis Wayne, who's best known for painting caricatures, cartoons of cats, and sort of making them domestic or bringing them into
popularizing
into the household, the British household, but even internationally speaking. But what's fascinating is that you have a cat that Benedict Cumberbatch and Claire Foy adopt early on, named Peter. Or they name him Peter the cat, and Cody Smith-McPhee's character in Power of the Dog is named Peter. And it's
Very
just
different
interesting.
relationships with Benedict
Yes.
in those movies, but just only you and only the like handful of people that are at TIFF that saw both of those movies. But hey, when they come out, one on Amazon Prime, one on Netflix, you can kind of compare.
Pick your poison, basically. You know,
Yeah, are you
cats
a
or
cat
dogs.
person or a dog person? Not very many dogs in this movie, but we'll
Well,
talk
there is
about
the
that.
one. There is
There
the
is
one
one.
that Peter goes to pet, and Benedict Cumberbatch whistles it away. Yeah. So as you mentioned, Power of the Dog is Jane Campion's first film in 12 years. The last movie that she made was Bright Star with Abby Cornish and Ben Whishaw. This is based on Thomas Savage's novel of the same name, and it takes place in Montana in 1925, although it's actually shot in New Zealand. That also might explain a little bit why like someone like Thomasin McKenzie is in the movie, because she is from New Zealand.
Taika Waititi in Electrical
Right.
Life of Louis
But
Wayne.
weirdly, he's also playing an American in that movie. Yeah, so Power of the Dog takes place in Montana in 1925, and it's from the point of view of a charismatic but also cruel cattle rancher played by Benedict Cumberbatch, Phil Burbank, who is one of these, you know, kind of rootin' tootin' old fashioned cowboy types that likes to hang out with the boys and, you know, make fun of anybody else that's not considered masculine, as we see as he picks on Cody Smith McPhee's sort of doctor in training and his mother, a recent widow played by Kirsten Dunst. And he also even picks on his own brother, George, played by Jesse Plemons, and calling him fatso. And what's fascinating early on about this relationship that Plemons and Cumberbatch's brother characters have is that they've lived in this sort of ranch farm for all their lives. They've basically inherited it from their parents, who have now gone to live in Salt Lake City, and they refer to them only as the old man and the old woman, not mom and dad, not mother, not father. And they also share the same bedroom together, which is also very, you know, strange, and we'll kind of get into that as we discuss it further. But you're starting to notice that this isn't your typical Western just from those little hints of what you would expect from, you know, the classic tropes that we've seen, you know, from John Ford Westerns, even into more recent stuff that, you know, people like Quentin Tarantino is kind of homaged with, you know, bringing back or resuscitating the spaghetti Western, you know, in movies like The Hateful Eight or Django Unchained. And I think that's the charm of a movie like this, because it's hard to kind of pinpoint what it ultimately is. And it's better left to discover. But essentially, the conflict occurs when Plemons' character weds Dunst's character and sort of brings her and her son, played by Cody Smith McPhee, to the ranch to live. And you find that Cumberbatch, who is a caustic character to begin with, begins to torment Dunst to the point of driving her insane. And we see this really fascinating dynamic between her and Cumberbatch, but also as the story progresses, we learn more about Cumberbatch that's really fascinating, again, in a character study kind of way, that this just isn't, you know, a classic, you know, Western in the vein of something that, you know, Ford or Clint Eastwood would have made. And on top of all that, it's just very unsettling. There's a lot of strange sensual sequences, a lot of talk about Bronco Henry.
I wrote that name
specifically
down, I said the same thing, that I never thought I'd use unsettling and sensual in the same sentence, but that's kind of the two kind of keywords I took out of this, where I'm a little bit this is a movie that I wish I saw in a theater with undivided attention on a big screen, because one, it's gorgeous. I thought the cinematography is great, the vistas and the mountains and the
Ari Wagner is the cinematographer, and she shot Zola earlier this year, and Lady Macbeth. She's a really, really talented cinematographer.
It looks great. Johnny Greenwood just with two bangers this year at the festival. I still do think I like they're very different, but I do think I like his Spencer score a little bit more than this one, but this one still absolutely rules. You get a little bit more Radiohead sounding stuff in this, but then still mix kind of classic Western sounds and things like that. But
And it's sparse too.
yeah,
Like the Spencer score
is more, yeah,
is more
in your face, like, yeah,
present
present, yeah.
throughout the entire film, where the score in The Power of the Dog is something that is kind of, you know, interwoven in certain scenes, but Campion also allows room for, you know, the wind to
Yeah.
blow, and sort of, you know, the environment to add a layer of sound to the actual score, which I think
Mhm.
was really, you know, perfect, because the way that, even though again it's shot in New Zealand, but Montana and the places that they shot in New Zealand, you know, it lends itself perfectly to that kind of big sky,
Oh,
where it
totally,
kind of
yeah.
just feels like, you know, this vast empty space.
But I mean, we talked a lot about Greenwood on our Spencer review, and I just echo that in here, where he's becoming, you know, one of the. It's so fascinating, and we're repeating ourselves, but seeing these rock stars, or like from these kind of bands that you would never think they would then go do this style of music, and I think you do hear a little bit more of the Radiohead style keyboard in this at times too. It's not sort of synthy, but you know the sound that I'm talking about from the like in some Radiohead songs. But I noticed that throughout too, and it just added to the unsettling nature of it. And then yeah, the cinematography both beautiful, and then there are moments with Cumberbatch that the perfect word is sensual, where whether he's rubbing a saddle or making a rope and stuff like that, it's just the way that it's shot and the way his hands move is just like very erotic and sensual. And then that's kind of what I found most interesting about the movie. Like it tackles toxic masculinity, sexuality, especially in a time period where if you were in a career like this or a cowboy like that, you would never kind of maybe talk about these things. So I thought that was interesting. My biggest problem, which I will let you go into after I kind of say why I didn't like it,
Sure.
because I feel like you have a very good perspective on why he does work. But Cumberbatch, for me in this, my biggest problem, and I think you have to get past it right away or you just won't be on board for the rest of it, is just I thought he was a little miscast, where um, I just from right away, I just was like, man, I could see five different people that maybe I wouldn't be distracted by in this role. And as this macho kind of cowboy, or at least pretending to be this macho kind of cowboy, and you'll get into that in a second. Um, I think you really kind of have to buy into him, or as it goes on, kind of understand what Campion's doing, maybe with his casting, which I didn't get to that point. And then it just became kind of distracting to me, where every time I saw him, I just couldn't get invested into the movie because I kept seeing Benedict Cumberbatch doing this accent, and just I got lost in it, in the sense of I was fixated and lost just on him rather than experiencing the movie as a whole. And I mentioned before, like I think I did the movie a disservice by, and this is the thing with TIFF, and these reviews are always going to be interesting because we're going to bring our personal experience of the festival into it a little bit, where I think when you see a movie and where you see a movie kind of does affect during TIFF, if it's your fourth movie of the day, or if you watch it right after something else, or if you are watching it at home versus in a theater, which is a thing that we have to kind of deal with the last 2 years, where I watched this at 10:30 at night after an exhausting day and a short nap. I just watched Petite Maman, and you know, it's a slow burn, and I felt like me being distracted by Cumberbatch, even though I thought Kirsten Dunst was great. Jesse Plemons is great as always. Cody Smith McPhee, who I've always liked when he pops up and stuff for the most part, I think is adds to that unsettling nature of the entire movie. So I'm kind of like, after I talked to you about it when we were at the train station the other day and sat on it, I think like Memoria, I've enjoyed it more the more I thought about it and the more I sat on it. Like, where at first I think I was a little mixed, but now I'm a little bit more mixed positive. And it's a movie that I do want to revisit Maybe when it comes out in cinemas in November, like I would have liked to see this at Lightbox or Princess of Wales or something like that. So I'm a little mixed positive, but the Cumberbatch thing I just couldn't get past. But you have an interesting perspective on that. Like,
Yeah, and I
and you
don't
like
want
the
to.
movie a lot.
I really like the movie quite a bit, and again, I think a big part of it, I kind of mentioned it, is it's really hard to pinpoint what this movie is,
Yeah.
especially going in. You think, okay, like, um I'm not too familiar with Thomas Savage's work, but I know his writing is influential on people like Cormac McCarthy. And Power of the Dog specifically is like, you know how there are like comedians there, this he's like an author's author,
Okay.
specifically when it comes to like classic westerns, but also his stuff deconstructs the genre as a whole and looks at it from the point of view of like, okay, whether it's a character or whether it's a setting or romancing the lifestyle, it kind of examines that with a microscope and sort of says, okay, well, why does this part of the world, why does this part of the US act and behave the way that they do,
Yeah.
and sort of kind of dissects that in a really interesting way. And I feel that with every moment in this movie, and that it's not necessarily paced in your classic kind of Western way. Like, it is a slow burn to some extent, but it's also disjointed. But I think it's disjointed on purpose, where the way that the movie unfolds, you think it's going in one direction, but then it goes somewhere else, and when it zigs, it zags, and vice versa. And I think that's very much like Cumberbatch's performance. Phil is a guy who, you know, is very much a towering figure in this world that he's created for himself and that he's lived his entire life through, and that he loves the way that things go, and he doesn't want things to change. And he, as we mentioned, can be just vicious
Yeah.
to
Very nasty man. Yeah.
the people around him, and not just his work, his ranch hands, or people that he comes across, but even his brother. And like, you look at Jesse Plemons, who gives a very subtle performance in this, and will probably be easily overlooked when it comes to
Oh,
awards time.
absolutely.
But
He's just the best.
yeah, and he's just one of those guys that, like, is
He could be in
gets-
Jungle Cruise a couple months ago, and then
Right.
and you buy him in both of those, one ridiculous and one very subtle in similar ways.
It's a thankless role
Yeah.
because it's more of a giving performance than anything else. It allows the other actors to kind of really bounce off of him and react to him, and he just kind of like is there to kind of help them out. But it is a very good performance. But going back to Cumberbatch, what's fascinating about that performance is, I don't disagree with you. I think when Cumberbatch is cast as an American, it's usually quite distracting, because he's not really that great with the American accent, whether it's Southern or depending on the dialect or the region. Like, he's never been able to kind of quite hone in on that. And there are some British actors that can't do that, and usually when we think of European actors, are much better at doing that than American actors doing British accents. But Keira Knightley, Benedict Cumberbatch, and Michael Fassbender, who I know is Irish German, like, those actors, as good as they are in movies, there's just something that they can't sort of convey with the American accent, and you can kind of hear the Britishness, the affectation in their voice come out.
Yeah.
But in this specific role, I think it is deliberate, and I think Campion knows what she's doing here.
Mhm.
And I think that there is this facade that is created around Phil, and sort of the myth of the cowboy, and sort of how he's always talking about Bronco Henry, and sort of always creating this, like, this is who I'm living up to. But then also there's this weird sort of subtext there, where the more you learn about him, you start to question certain things, or wonder certain things about his life, with not only this guy taking him under his wing, who
Mhm.
we never see in the film, but he's always talking about, and kind of feels like a ghost that kind of looms over Cumberbatch's character. But then even his parents, the way that he talks about them as though they're not, he's not affectionate in any way. He's Cumberbatch's character is a very smart man, a very calculated person. But he's also just he can lash out at you and anybody, and he doesn't care who it is, and he has a certain sort of way of living that if you kind of mess with that, or you try to change things, he is going to get back at you. And I think some of the best moments are when he is really gaslighting, essentially, Kirsten Dunst's character Rose, who just lost her husband as the movie begins, and has her own kind of little restaurant, and begins this relationship with Clemens's George. And you see her trying to be cordial and make it work, but Cumberbatch is just thinking that, she's in it for the money, and this kind of thing. And I like that weird, unsettling dynamic. And Cumberbatch actually said that, like, he spent absolutely no time, even in rehearsals, really working with Dunst,
because
and
he
you can
wanted
kind of
that. Yeah.
yeah, you can feel that unease between the two. Even the way that, like, when the perspective does shift at times on Dunst's character and sort of her relationship with Smith McPhee and Plemons, that we see Phil in the background circling like a shark. But I think that there is a deliberate reason to Cumberbatch being cast in a role where he doesn't quite fit the mold of what you'd expect that kind of casting to be. Like, you could cast somebody that is more grizzled or classically salt of the earth type kind of cowboy, someone like even like a Josh Brolin or something like that, maybe a little bit younger, but that type.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
If this was made in like the 80s or early 90s, it would be like someone like Tommy Lee Jones, although I think the subject matter might turn someone off, turn Tommy Lee Jones off because he's more of a conservative actor.
Sure.
But those are the types of actors that you would expect. And I think that that's what the movie does so well here, is that you expect the unexpected. And even in the casting of that, like even in his body language, there's just something about, like, that's so off, the way that, that kind of cowboy kind of does this, moving, like, with his hips, like, right?
Holds his belt, and he has these big, like, the kind of, I forget what they're called.
It's like a child sort of
chaps. He has those chaps on, and he walks around.
He is very childlike in that way, and like he's emotionally inept in certain aspects, and you get the feeling that, like, he's still playing cowboy. Like, he's not, like, he's playing cowboy the way that he would as though he were a child. Or maybe he never really grew up. And
I think that's an interesting perspective on the casting. And you kind of turned me a little bit on that, like, where while watching it, I never bought into that. But after talking to you, I thought that was an interesting kind of perspective on him, of how you could get past that. And I feel like on a rewatch, I would like it even more with that kind of perspective going in. And that's kind of what ultimately why, I still think, after thinking about it, really enjoyed the movie. I just, and hell of an ending as well.
And it makes you want to go back and rewatch it, knowing what happens, and sort of focusing on specific characters or key moments even more. And I feel that that's another thing that I really love about this film, is that it's so rich in its design and sort of world that it's fleshed out. And again, it's not your typical Americana, point of view. And that's what I love about, international filmmakers making American movies, that you get a lens that is very unique and different from what you'd expect. Like, if an American filmmaker did this, like if the Coen brothers did this, like, it would still probably be a great movie, but it would be a very different film in terms of, like, how it looks at the world that is, the US, and specifically the South. And with someone like, Jane Campion, it's the same thing with, like, Wim Wenders directing Paris, Texas. It's just fascinating to see, the desert landscape shot in a way. But also, again, it's still unsettling and weird, because the facade of it being, Montana, but it's actually New Zealand, also adds that
to it,
weird meta layer of, like, everything being kind of this fake Western, but at the same time, there's something underneath it that's just so, you want to get to the end of the mystery, but you can't anticipate what's going to happen. And then when you do, you're just kind of taken aback, and you're thinking, okay, I should have been watching this.
I know, I had to rewind. I rewound the ending a couple times, because it's not, again, we talked about it, like, it's subtle. It's not really like, you still have to be paying attention, and you still have to kind of understand what she's saying. It doesn't spoon feed you any of it at all. And even the ending, I was there and I'm like, wait, what? I'm like rewound. And I was like, oh shit. I'm like, that's cool. And
even the way it's divided into
yeah,
chapters, right? Like,
you know me, I'm a huge fan of chapters, Eric. And then like at first I'm like, does this need to be chapters? But then I'm like, I love it. But yeah, I do like what you said, where it was felt a little disjointed, but ultimately kind of works when it's all together.
it reminded me also a little bit of the Sisters Brothers, where
Yep.
again you take a West, like that is a really really underrated movie. The Jacques Audiard,
Again, another movie that I need to go back and watch, because I during TIFF sometimes I'm just fried.
right, and but you look at that and like how, again, you know, this Joaquin Phoenix
Yeah.
and John C. Reilly, and sort of their dynamic as brothers, and sort of how, you know, there's this weird underlying current of like, you know, the way that they were raised and the way that they grew up really has basically stagnated them to a point where, you know, they're still children in a weird way. And you get that even again with, you know, Plemons and Cumberbatch's characters sharing a bedroom as grown men, you know, and there's just this, there is a weird incestual quality there, but it's
There's a
never
couple
really...
moments in the movie where we were discussing off air too, where I'm just like, was that implied that it's incestuous, or is it just that he really loves his brother and he doesn't want that to be ruined, or this woman coming in and
it
you know,
throws off
essentially...
routine as
Yeah,
well, right?
exactly,
Like Cumberbatch is very fastidious in his ways, where, you know, like he does certain things at a certain time. Like there's this whole sort of conversation that Plemons and Cumberbatch have about bathing, that Cumberbatch doesn't bathe or bathes like once a month, and you know, they're inviting Keith Carradine's governor over to see the place and to meet Kirsten Dunst, who... that scene
Oh yeah,
is incredible.
and she's
That
great. We haven't
awkwardness...
spent enough time on it, but she is
Yeah.
fantastic throughout the whole movie.
But she's always good. Like I've always
Yeah.
found that Kirsten Dunst is, I mean, obviously her work with Sofia Coppola is amazing, but she always kind of never gets the credit that she deserves.
I
And
agree
like
with
even
that, yeah.
something, you know, like you look even at like the Spider-Man movies. Yeah, like she wasn't necessarily the standout performance there, but the evolution of Mary Jane in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, you know, I think she doesn't get enough credit, especially for that second film. But yeah, like she's going, like she's almost in her own movie at times, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. I mean, like, you see this character almost in like a horror movie, like the way that like
her face and everything, just how she acts with her eyes, and
yeah, like it could almost be an Ari Aster film within The Power of the Dog, where like it's so anxiety driven and unsettling, where, you know, you see this poor human being being driven to drinking and depression and not feeling good enough,
because
and
this guy is just such a fucking asshole.
yeah. But even that party scene where, you know, she's holding, you know, that tray of drinks and kind of feels almost like she's just there as a trophy wife, and no one's talking to her, and the awkwardness of that moment is so powerful and subtle and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even have Cumberbatch in the scene, you know.
No, I agree. I think the best thing going is that it mixes these beautiful moments and sensual moments with this kind of unsettling weirdness throughout it. And yeah, ultimately I liked it. I think I'll like it even more on a rewatch. So I'm gonna give it a 3.5 out of 5. But I am very much looking forward to watching it again. So
Same. I'm gonna give it a 4.5 out of 5. I really did love the film quite a bit, and it again, like to your point, like Memoria, it's one of those movies where you keep thinking about certain scenes and sort of how the ending is structured and wanting to go back, and again, all the performances are great. I think kind of the biggest surprise, even though it's not a surprise because, you know, he's always good, is Cody Smith McPhee. You know, I mean, when his first film was The Road with Viggo Mortensen, speaking of Cormac McCarthy, you know, an adaptation of The Road.
But he's great in Let Me In as well.
Yeah, and Slow West with Michael Fassbender.
Slow West, there you go, another kind of Western, what we're talking about.
But he does some interesting stuff here, and I think it's a hard role to kind of discuss without getting too deep into it. But I think it is a great supporting performance that I wouldn't be surprised it gets an Oscar nomination. And it's just, you think about, again, the layers of how people are presented and what's underneath that.
It's really, yeah, he's very good and very unsettling too. Thank you all for listening. You can check out all of our TIFF coverage right here on YouTube. People are loving our Dune review.
I
You
almost
guys
feel like we should do like a conversations with maybe someone else who
who really
likes
liked
the
it.
film, like
Yeah,
an
yeah.
esteemed critic, and just
Oh,
talk
absolutely. I
about
would love
that.
to in
Yeah.
a professional way, right? With
Yeah.
not people yelling at each other. But you can check out all of our reviews right here on YouTube. Subscribe, hit that notification bell. You'll get all of our TIFF coverage. We're still doing this for another 6 days or so. I think it'll slow down a little bit now that we're kind of almost halfway through, but you can get all our reviews there. If you prefer the audio version, or if you're listening to the audio version, you're already in the right spot. It's on Untitled Movie Reviews on podcast services everywhere. If you want a one-stop shop for everything we do, just head over to our Letterboxd HQ. It's Untitled_movies. You'll get links to all of our social channels. You'll get our star ratings, which also have the links to the YouTube and podcast versions. You'll get lists. We'll put up our best of the festival. Each Eric and I's. Maybe I'll put those up now. We can update them there as we go on as well. And maybe we'll do a combined best of the festival list. So lists, ratings, all that kind of stuff, our personal profiles, all over Untitled_movies on Letterboxd. Thank you all for listening or watching. My name is Matt Rorabeck. You can find more of my work around the internet, but mostly at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rorabeck.
And I'm Eric Marchen. You can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene. And on the social media side of things, I always have it planned, at EM6211.
Until next time.
Here's to you, Bronco Henry.
Not enough dogs in the movie, actually.
There's a horse, though.
Lots of horses. Bye, everybody.
Saddle up.